chairperson wetu ataweza peana official statement ya chama. Alafu ile Malio ataongea, tuwe na mtu mmoja kutoka katika nchi za ughaibuni, alafu viongozi wetu wote watasema neno angalau waweze kashifu tendo hilo. Asanteni.
Very much good evening everyone and the members of the media. This is the statement by the UDA party on the heinous atrocities observed during Maandamano yesterday, the 12th of July 2023. Our attention has been drawn by the orgy of violence leading to death and wanton destruction of property resulting from protests called by the Azimio leader Raila Odinga. UDA party condemns in the strongest terms possible their abhorrent acts of violence and the destruction of property perpetuated in the name of protests. We note with concern that unlike before, when the well-orchestrated violence was witnessed in some predictable parts of the country, the perpetrators of these heinous crimes imported the mayhem to other parts of the country. It concerns us that the protests and acts of hooliganism were well organized and exported to parts of Makueni, Machakos, Nyeri, Kirinyaga, and Kisii, which have traditionally remained calm, but where violence and death were reported. The protests resulted in the following. 1. 9 lives were lost in Mlolongo and Kitengela. 2. Destruction and looting of Eastmart and Quickmart supermarkets in Kitengela and Mlolongo. 3. Attack on the Kitengela Chiefs camp. 4. More than 36 injured and hospitalized. 5. KEPSA has estimated that Kenya is losing, on average, 3 billion every day of violence out of the violent demonstrations. 6. Deliberate attack on the country's critical infrastructure, Thika Superhighway and Nairobi Expressway. The intention was to close down the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and then blatant looting of businesses within Nairobi CBD. And 8, we saw Azimio MPs actually celebrate the destruction and the violence that we witnessed here. This state of anarchy is not about the cost of living anymore, but one person who has refused to accept his election loss. Although the Constitution allows Kenyans, every Kenyan, to peacefully picket while unarmed, what we have witnessed in the country cannot in any way be described as peaceful protest and picketing. What happened in parts of the country on Wednesday was pure economic sabotage by non-political mercenaries with ulterior motives aimed at reversing the upward economic trajectory that has been driven by the Kenya Kwanza administration. It is sad we have allowed Mr. Odinga to run amok by funding violence anytime he is defeated in an election. The latest episode of the violence in the guise of protesting the rising cost of living was one of the many evil schemes by the opposition leader and his sponsors to bulldoze his way into government and to ensure that the transformation agenda by President William Ruto is neutered. As he has been described before, Mr. Odinga has lived up to his reputation of being the Lord of violence by always sponsoring violence while rubbing his hands in glee as people lose their lives. The country must stop treating Mr. Odinga, his sponsors, and the perpetrators of the attack with kid gloves and instead let him bear the full consequences of his murderous acts. What Mr. Odinga and his allies are doing is tantamount to terrorism against the very own people he purports to be fighting. Section 2 of the Prevention of Terrorism Act defines terrorism as unlawful use of violence or threat of use of violence with the intent to advance a political, religious, ideological, or other such cause and includes any unlawful use of violence. It is therefore clear that as neo leaders behind the wanton destruction destruction of property and acts of lawlessness and loss of life are guilty of terrorism and must be held to account. We ask the government, machinery, law enforcement and judicial officials to take decisive action on those found culpable for these barbaric acts of violence. Thank you very much.